just wanted to say thank you to Aude and Eben for um, stopping by to talk to our class about this amazing collaborative project that they're working on. I did just some, minor, small amount of research just to kind of, just give a bio. So there are probably some holes in your bios, and if you want to fill them in, feel free to correct me. So
Sure.
I'll start with, Oud Jomini is an artist, curator, and architect based in New Haven, Connecticut. She's currently associate at Pelly Clark Pelly architecture firm. She's extremely involved in the art scene in New Haven. Uh, Last year, she co-curated an amazing exhibition at Art Space in New Haven entitled Perverse Furniture that explored the different ways in which artists have worked with and explored the legacy of the Bauhaus design movement and how physical objects can engage with us on a kind of bodily level and psychological level. And, I saw that you went to RISD undergrad. Is that correct? And then
Yeah.
you're
Yep.
also went to Yale.
Yeah, I got a BFA in painting and a master's in architecture. So two things that will kind of sort of come through some of the work I'm doing.
Cool.
There's always sort of a push and pull.
And I'm really interested in that. And then Eben Kling is an artist and educator based in New Haven, Connecticut as well, whose work explores the human figure. Would that be correct? And the sort of psychological implications of the human figure, sort of as a medium.
It's part of the pile.
Part of the pile, yeah.
Yeah.
I saw like a little interview that you gave at Art Space, so I was just kind of
good Lord,
pulling off that. So, but I'm sure we'll find out a lot more about what you do, and you're also an assistant professor of illustration and printmaking at Central Connecticut State University.
That's correct.
Based near New Haven. So, I just wanted to say that like this kind of talk happened almost out of sheer luck through just social media communication between Aude and myself. And it turned out that Aude and Eben are exploring this kind of idea of the dystopian virtual space using Doom, which is, I guess, an open source video game, and they're going to go further into that. But I thought it would just be really useful for all of our students to just get a window into how you're working, especially since this class has been so focused on hand making during the digital era, the way in which hand making can pass into digital space and how digital ideas can pass back out into the sort of analog space as well. We've been exploring those kinds of ideas a lot in this class. And, it's really interesting because I got a chance to see the studio that both of you share, the drawings that you're making by hand, and like how they're being incorporated into a digital space and animated. And so it's going to be really interesting to just get a window into your creative process today. And I think it'll be useful for my students to just see what you're up to, and fascinating. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about what you're working on together.
So Eben and I are going to share the mic, and we'll both talk over slides. And so I have a PowerPoint that I'll show to kind of describe our interests and ideas and show sort of images of drawings and process from the game. Then I'll use my digital virtual camera to play the game and show you the kind of back end like world that we've made. And Eben's going to show you more like the code and kind of asset management tool that we're using to sort of bring all these drawings together into this world. So I think, I'll start the PowerPoint and I'll sort of take it slow, and we might interrupt each other. We'll try not to trip over each other's.
So
We probably will. So I think I'm going to present and just pipe up. If you can't see the images, if it lags, like if I'm talking to something that doesn't look like the right slide, just interrupt me, and also interrupt me with questions or whatever. I think, I'm kind of also somebody who thinks that like having cacophony in these meetings and everyone's mics on and weird interruptions is also great, but it doesn't always make for a great presentation. So I don't know, just pipe up whenever you want. I'm just going to present and tell me if you can't see it. So if you can see, like you can see the PowerPoint, you can see my title screen. I'm going to make it bigger, and now you can still see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let me know when you want me to bring up Slade to Aude, because I don't want to shrink the presentation, but just let me know and I can throw it up again.
I think we could do that. We could do it at the end, after I play the game, maybe, so that way it's sort of like the end part. We could talk about it.
Be a situation where you stop screen sharing temporarily, and then you start screen sharing, and then you can kind of alternate that way to just ensure that
we don't have two presentations confusing each other. We'll do that in a synchronized fashion. Okay, so our project is called Doomhaven. We are in New Haven, and we are making a video game that's really like based on Doom from 1993. So an old video game that we both loved. I moved to the US in 1993, so I didn't speak English, and I was sort of isolated and angry. So Doom was a game that I played, and really it helped me get through life at the time. So I have a very special relationship with it. So that's sort of part of why, but there's also other reasons. I think this is a slide just showing who we are. I mean, I think our project really started out as a kind of joke in the midst of COVID, because we were sort of stifled by how we couldn't really directly engage in this digital space. And we were just really looking for public space and something full of surprises and something that provides another mode of communication. So I started looking at Twitch channels and like other ways to communicate directly, or more indirectly, but really relocating to a shared digital setting. So here we are playing a multiplayer Doom mod sort of together but apart, and kind of dying over and over in this game that's really hard, and also kind of talking to each other. So I mean, I was interested in this other way to communicate via these sort of Zoom meetings. And so also we have been collaborating for a while, and we are interested in sharing our respective skill sets. So I think we're interested in visual incongruity, and also doing away with preciousness of sort of one idea, like in art. And I think both of us share that interest, and that's kind of why we can come together. Another thing that is really dear to me is really the ability to inhabit a world that has various modes of imagery. So photos, digital, pixelated, text, drawings, because those are all things that I understand and relate to. And so kind of bringing them all together in this like clashed landscape, the digital space really allows you to do that very fluidly, and also to subversively broadcast messages via sort of, virtual cameras or digital broadcast channels that aren't necessarily one message and aren't necessarily a camera looking into your private space. So I think, I think a lot about the intrusion of virtual cameras into people's private spaces and how people look at each other's bedrooms, and how I can instead take that over and broadcast, some strange messages or subversive things. So I'm interested in that mode. And Eben, if you want to talk about this, I think we both love monsters and hybrids.
Yeah, well, actually, just going back to what you were saying, or like previously too, just about like sort of the OBS hijack, if you will. It's like, I don't know, especially in the last 8 months, I'm pretty sure some of you have probably gotten like a FaceTime call that you weren't expecting or something, right? Like it just lights up and it's a FaceTime, and it's like, it's kind of like somebody peeking in your window, like it's, sometimes it's not exactly the most welcome sort of visit. And so again, just to reiterate that, I think that, yeah, I mean, kind of using this platform of being present in a Doom mod, but during a Zoom meeting, was kind of a reaction to a certain sort of angst towards the kind of current reality of, and just a way to hoodwink that thing that everybody just kind of folded over into normalcy, from what I saw to be a little too quickly. And so there's, yeah, just to kind of tack on to that a little bit. Yeah, I mean, these images, things like Schoengauer and Grunwald and just the occult in Western art has always been of something that is, interesting to me. And so I think about this as an interesting kind of high and low kind of conversation too, where you can have, Passion of a Saint, Saint Anthony, or Grunwald or Schoengauer kind of depicting kind of hellish biblical stories. And you can go to an institution to look at these revered objects, but then you can kind of do something very similar with a video game and 8-bit like technology, like John Carmack and John Romero kind of playing with the same imagery in a completely different context, right? And there's obvious differences, but the sort of imaginative elements are still there and the mythology is still there. And to me, I find that to be pretty interesting, and another way to kind of relate it back to historical painting, albeit a bit of a stretch for me, it just kind of feels comfortable.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think borrowing symbols and images that are powerful, right? And also kind of dredging up our fears and like humor in that and like taking things apart. So I think we both share that interest. Also from architecture, I think more and more as architects, we work with given parts and systems. So we no longer draw buildings, we model buildings with gaming software. We use Lumion, and that has pre-rigged scale figures that have motion, and they are mannequins that are fully animated. And, one's carrying their suitcase and one's in a swimsuit, and they're all just clashed together in these worlds that we design now. And having this like instant over detail and, these kind of pre-rigged systems of intelligent parts that you have to work with, like this kind of armature that you're supposed to like work with a certain way, and really kind of allowing recombination, breaking them, clashing them apart, trying to make different things with them is really something that I'm really interested in. So like not taking anything for granted. And I think the power of that and the kind of creative intuition that comes out of using these parts in a wrong way is really interesting and goes back to this kind of like hacking idea. So I think Eben and I also worked on this project at the beginning of pandemic that had to do with using old paintings and really experiments in crossing signals and crossing disciplinary boundaries. So painting as sculpture, creating new artwork out of paintings. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that, Eben, but I call it pantry rehash when resources are limited, because I think that at the beginning of COVID, that's also something that we had a reaction to.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of a lot to. Can you go back to the previous slide for a second?
Sure.
Yeah. So like thinking about these objects in particular, right at sort of the height of the first kind of lockdown all the way back in March and April, and being required to kind of stay in place, as it were, right? It provides an opportunity to kind of refocus, rehash, recycle, and just reconsider previous work that you have, to put quite bluntly, laying around, right? So the source for all of these sculptures was actually my graduate thesis. So these were all of the paintings I had made for my graduate thesis that had been rolled up and sort of forgotten for a number of years. And I was kind of sick of moving them around from studio to studio. And so in a time where we're like, you know, we couldn't really hang out with our friends, and we couldn't see our families, we couldn't just be in a large group, we decided to kind of, you know, again, most things that me and Oud work on kind of start off as a bad joke. So we just kind of started to think about, well, let's make some friends, you know? And it's kind of not an accident that these things actually kind of look like body pillows. But this was a way to kind of reconstitute older works into something new, and this goes into this a lot of my own work in the studio, and I think an ideal that we both share is that when we make objects, or not even objects, but just material and generate material, we always kind of make it with this idea in the back of our minds that it's slightly modular, right? That it doesn't always have one home. That a painting can become a sculpture, that can become a painting again, that could then become a book. And that book could become filler for another sculpture, you know? Just the life cycle of certain ideas and objects is really fascinating to me. And I think that also kind of approaching it in this way was a way for me and Oud to kind of work together, even though this is imagery that I had generated. It was a curatorial and collaborative, constructive project. And it was a good proto experience for what we're working on now in a lot of ways. I feel like this was kind of the first sort of object, like real significant object-based project we ever worked on together. And a lot of the sensibilities in this, I think, can be found in Doomhaven too, you know?
And a lot of the writing I did at the time for this project also carried into the things I thought about in the Doomhaven project. So that's kind of why we bring it up. I think as painters, we're really still very interested in flatness. So flatness is a quality, a fundamental quality, something that's really important, and really it's about painting and how this translates to digital space. I mean, of course, we're looking at flat screens. Everything gets flattened to a screen. It has a different kind of flatness, but you know, just the spatial qualities of what that flatness can be in digital space is different. You know, it's like you have these meshes that are basically not even anything. It's like pixel thin flatness is different than the thickness of a canvas. So I think about that, like the degrees of that and how it's important to me. I think that we just asked ourselves as painters also, how can you make a painting? Can you make a video game that's a painting? And I think for us, Doom was that, because it's really a two-dimensional game. And we also were missing public space in New Haven. So we really wanted to think about a way to remake New Haven in Doom in this way that we can access this world anywhere from anywhere and be in this space in New Haven and our own version of it. So those were the two things that really drove this project. I think that, you know, I was really flustered at being stuck staring at a blue screen, or, you know, just being in this flatness that just was deadening. Really working in architecture, when you're working with buildings and contractors and all these different people, right? It's really about teams and this interaction. So having to be stuck on the screen and clicking away, like, what does that really feel and look like? And how do you even like capture that experience in a way that's generative? And so on the right, it's more, this image is about the genuine curiosity that I gained from like these disembodied travels in this world of available mods for Doom. There's 27 years of community built new levels for this game that other people have made. Basically, from the start, it was meant as this hacker kind of modifiable game that came with the tools to build it. So really from the start, there were all these kind of weird worlds built for it. And that has accrued, and they're still available, you know, online, and there's whole communities playing multiplayer Doom games at all times still. So I think that the idea that something that I was so enamored with at, you know, age 14 was still around and alive and changing as these various worlds that had been made since was really alluring. And I started just exploring, you know, different mods, like downloading different maps and exploring them as if they were like new landscapes. So not unlike, you know, travels in Google Earth or, you know, something like that, just having no idea what you would find, right? And being able to sort of travel in the back ends, kind of like in the builder, like looking at these worlds. So not unlike being in an architectural model, but it was just something completely different, not built for a purpose. So I think this is one particular mod that was built for Doom that's basically like it's called Ancient Aliens. Like if you ever watched the show Ancient Aliens, it's something that Evan and I both like this show, but it's also like very hokey and it's fake and it's made up like his stories, but everything is made out of flimsy evidence and like it's all this just graphic nonsense showing you theories about things. And this level is built based on that. So I think what really drew me to it is like the beauty of this 2D flat cutout world and how, you know, you really get to see when you're working in this builder tool, like how everything is just made out of these flat parts. And it really does make this immersive kind of landscape when you're in it, but it's truly just not a 3D game. This game in 93 was not, it was built before 3D engines were available. And you know, John Carmack basically built in the engineering workaround to have walls look like they were taller in certain places to make sort of rooms, but really it was just a flat map with, you know, 2D walls, and it told the engine to render like X number of pixels high, right? So it only rendered what the point of view saw only. So it only rendered the pixels in your view. It knew where you were, and you know, it was the illusion of 3D. So this is using the engine to visualize the back end of it, but it's really just coordinates and flat. So that's also really interesting to us in terms of like how we love painting and how we like love these kind of 2D things. And I don't know if you have something to say about this, Eben, but I just really like that world.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of said most of it, but just, yeah, I mean, again, like the way of thinking about equilibrium through flatness, right? And thinking about like flatness kind of as an equalizer of experience in a lot of ways. It kind of eradicates a lot of I think flatness is accessible to everyone, I guess, is sort of what I'm trying to say in a way, right? And I think that this is another example of that, where you have this community of people creatively making in this way, and it's reflective of those sorts of values and methods and availabilities. Like the fact that this is still free, that everything is still free, that everything is still accessible, that there is a community of people who are still learning how to do this 27 years later. There's just something kind of, yeah, I don't know. There's an anti kind of consumerist bend to this game too, in a way that I find to be really fascinating and compelling. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just think that there's something about that, and especially, yeah, just the sense of flatness being an equalizer, you know?
Ports of Doom are a joke in the community. You know, it's like it's always a joke, like what will not run Doom? Like you could run Doom on anything. So it's a joke. And like people have ported Doom on, you know, supposedly a pregnancy tester. I mean, it's not really Doom on a pregnancy tester because they had to put in a whole new chip for it. But, you know, the artistry of even just getting all kinds of devices to play Doom as like a joke, but it's also like a hacker challenge and this like hello world, like funny thing. And so yeah, I mean, it's kind of the joy of that has continued like for 27 years, and that alone is amazing. And about Flat World, I think, I don't know if any of you have read Flat World, but also there's this great Carl Sagan video, what is it called, Flatland, or there's flat, yeah, it's anyways, there's just a lot of love for flatness as something to think about. And I think people take for granted the kind of 3D graphics and graphic cards that we have now, and how everything is kind of 3D modeled. And so I think that just understanding where that limit is, and how you can still make, I don't know, just make that boundary apparent is something that is interesting to us.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
I mean, I think, you know, there's been, you know, for a while, like a long conversation in painting about, you know, like moving to you know, the painted surface, and that kind of journey from illusion to abstraction to sort of flat textured abstraction. And I don't know, I guess I'm asking a question about this idea of like like part of like one aspect that's fun about the flatness of painting is that you can create the illusion of three-dimensionality.
Mhm.
And like one of the things from, we're working with Unity, one of the things that I thought was really fascinating about Unity is this idea of like scanning something in that is flat and abstract, and then putting it into a space that enforces perspective onto it, like
Mm.
no matter what. I don't know. I'm just kind of riffing, but I just think there's an interesting kind of conflict between flatness and illusion, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
I
talk
mean,
about that, right? As a window into something or frame into something. Eben, what were you gonna say?
yeah. No, just that I like the way you put that, David. How it just like kind of forces the illusion or forces perspective. And those kinds of modeling software have gotten so much more sophisticated since 1993,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah, yeah.
But I love that this still does that
Right,
in like a bland architectural way, right? Like
right,
I
right.
love that, and that's the other thing too. Just like the multiple layers of flatness are really interesting, where the engine will create and present this illusion of 3D space that forces perspective into the architectural space, but the actors that occupy that space are still walking cardboard cutouts.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And like there's this like just total graphic disparity or spatial disparity rather between the space and the occupants. And I don't know, I love that.
I like that too. I think
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
it's important to have both things held in the same place, even though they're not the same. And I think that when things like that are impossibly held in place in the same world, that is when you start to, I don't know, take things apart in your own mind, right? It gives you this critical distance that's not just like, oh, I get that it's a painting, but it's like, I get that the artistry and technique that goes into making these different parts speak together. And I think, more becoming more fluid was kind of photogrammetry software where you can like take, pictures in Google Maps and have those pictures remapped as a 3D model within like an hour, and own
Mm-hmm.
that 3D model. It's like there's just this like fluidity of now 2D information back to 3D, 3D back to 2D,
Mm-hmm.
and the kind of translation in between. And I'm interested in those garbled points when something is like not quite one or the other, and it's like somewhere it's sort of broken, and you're looking just in between the pixel mesh and the flat thing. And it's like really like interesting where it breaks apart. And it's also interesting when you start to believe in it. So
Mm-hmm.
having that fluidity is like really great. And that's like something really powerful about digital space. I think about that a lot. And the way that Carmack made things stack as 3D platforms and bridges in this game is there is a workaround called 3D floors, and it's basically like an inside-out sector that's remote and transfers its properties within a sector that's 2D. So it's basically this illusion. So there are these like kind of visual illusions that are worked into this engineering that's really funny and weird. And the way you build it is by making this like inside-out sector. So it things that don't make any sense, right? And it's like subtractive lights, like black holes, kind of things that you can make in digital world that are really mathematically maybe make sense, but not they don't make sense in reality. So there's always this like
Yeah.
interest and magic in that, and I love that. I think that playing with that, the ability to play with that and sort of push it or make it evident is really cool. So that's just
Yeah.
something that's been really good about, I don't know, just this process of discovery, like learning how to do this thing. And
I
yeah, you're using obsolete technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's something too that's like really of interest to me with this medium in particular. Like the 3D floor example is a perfect one, right? Because even in like the language of painting, that's something that's always kind of interested me, just experimenting with the way that we perceive flat space and, simple formal concerns like something being both positive and negative at the same time and things like that. And so how in Doom, for example, if you're walking under a balcony, you're actually walking through an empty room like 30 meters away, as far as our like spatial reasoning is concerned. And that is
Mm-hmm.
just like totally I don't know. It's kind of fun.
Philosophically interesting and amazing, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think that is the potential of this kind of space, and that's really, I don't know, that has been like why we're still obsessed with this project. And I think also, I mean, for my work, it's I think I put this slide up to talk about my work because I think in architecture we use digital modes. It's called parametric design. So really, it's the shape of digital space for architecture. It's like this interest in data that drives logic of efficiency and how you can sell design with it. So it's really using data to design things and to like create options. And so I always go back to this thing where I have a love for painting and I have a degree in painting. So I always go back to like I distrust this kind of parametric design. It's like, kind of optimizing of data into design as something that's also like kind of hokey, just strategic salesmanship. And I use both modes and I try to like take things apart and go back and forth between just really like more intuitive modes and more digital, sort of data driven things. So I think this project does both of those things for me, and is something that I always work through, just also in my day job and general working methods. So yeah, Doom. So yeah, we're using idTech 1. It was developed by John Carmack for the game in '93. If you don't know him, he's also headed Oculus VR. He like is the person that drove all these graphic developments, and really this kind of started with this game. But I think I recommend the book Masters of Doom, which is like a really easy read and great read about these guys if you're interested in video games and like the kind of history of that, just really the history of these two guys that developed this game. And John Carmack is a really smart and interesting engineer, and if you can watch YouTube videos of him talking, he has really key ideas that are really still very, very relevant. And the fact that you're using Unity and a VR headset, it owes a lot to him. So I think it's really interesting to think about. And so yeah, if some of you didn't play it, and maybe this dates us and we're a little bit older, but I think the game is still really fun to play, and it looks like this. So yes, it looks dated in terms of like pixelation, but it's still really fast and fun to play. And I think it's like why it's lasted so long and why it's such a success.
Sorry, not to interrupt you, but could you repeat the name of that book that you recommended again?
It's called Masters of Doom by David Kushner.
Okay.
And it's really a great read. I mean, I think for not just, even if you're not into Doom or didn't play, I think it's a really great American story about this kind of self-making technology. These two, dudes that were into kind of I don't know, countercultural things and hacker ethics. So it's a great one.
Tons of drama
too. Yeah, it's a great story. It's a really
skaters too much money.
It's a really good story. It was a lot of highs and lows, and it's a very good it's a good book to also think about patents and like ownership of intellectual property and like what John Carmack thinks about that. So I think that's just just something to think about. Definitely a good read, an easy read. And so go ahead.
Why? So I mean, it feels almost like quaint in a funny way. There's still open source stuff, but like this idea of like making a game that anybody can access and use. It does feel kind of almost like a 90s. It was made in the 90s, but I don't know. It feels like the antithesis of what a lot of video games seem to be about now. I don't know, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm oversimplifying.
It's quite literally the antithesis of Doom now.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, it's a completely commercial enterprise that is owned by, I mean, they're currently the studio that owns the rights to like the contemporary incarnations of this franchise is about to be purchased by Microsoft. There is no shareware there, you know? I think it's like the culture of this is just still perpetual. And it's interesting that, like, you know, maybe it is kind of quaint in that way. It's a nice idea, but it seems kind of relegated to a small corner, and it's a subculture, you know?
Yeah.
But I still think within that, there's some like really rich cultural.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say
things to chew
quaint in
on.
a derogatory way. It was more just like, wow, things have changed. You know, it seems
Yeah.
inspiring on another level, you know.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But there also are like tons of people kind of making games and like, you know, distributing them on itch, like really sort of like, I don't know, making
Yeah.
experiments, and it's become more kind of small experiments and apps, and it's like it's become more crowdsourced in that way,
Mhm.
right? It's like the time of the like gaming studio, like Golden Boys that give it away. And it's like, you know, they did make a lot of money from the game, you know, just sort of because it was this like shareware, but then, you know, you had to write in for more levels, and people also gave money because they loved it so much and so many people played it. So I think it was sort of like um it was also a strategy, right? And it also did make them a
Mhm.
lot of money. So I think it's interesting to think about. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of game designers these days don't necessarily make money out of their games. It's sort of peripheral. But I think it's interesting. It's just a different mode and like different lengths of time for development. And I mean, you guys are all
Mhm.
making Unity experiments, so you know, it's like how important is it to monetize that, and like how you do that these days is very different. So I think that's not something I'm thinking about with this at all, and it's just
Mhm.
like, so it is something that's kind of important to think about, but it's like it's not something I know how to address at this point.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think that's it's just something where, I mean, now, you know, right now it's still a platform for people to play multiplayer. People love to play deathmatch, and there's still servers all over the world just to play this game. They're just set up, you know, just for this, and people just tuning in at all times. So it's kind of interesting, and it's just for us been an opportunity to just re-examine something that we've taken for granted, like look a little bit deeper, think about it in terms of trajectory of technology. And so the game that we're
And
making is called
to add to that, Ood, just to also just kind of rethink some of the maybe some of the more complicated cultural implications that we maybe would have taken for granted as juvenile delinquents playing Doom.
Yeah, also because it is a first person shooter game, right? And it's like there's a whole culture of people playing these games, and you know, it's not meant to ever go into art or institutions or anything, because there's something like that's perfectly gleeful about, you know, these modes of engagement, but also in our like current society to like take up guns and shoot down crowds even in a video game is not okay, right? And we've gotten to the point where we do want to think about that. We do want to be critical of how we have taken some of these things for granted, but we also don't want to take away the like action, the kind of direct ability to act, you know, towards something or make gestures to make way in your own world. So I think that thinking through a point of view game and how popular these shooter games still are, right, is also something that we've had conversations about and
Mhm.
thought about, and especially in view of recent violence and thinking about just in general, like violence in politics. So I think that's something that I do think about that. You know, this format, this medium also comes loaded with this you know, this idea of this shoot 'em up game. And so yeah, the we really reinvent this game also through the lens of our kind of art history sensibility. So like it's a critique of literal weapons, and we kind of bring in um, mundane tools and other ideas instead of having literal guns, but we really are using this armature of this first person shooter game, so we retain the kind of satisfaction of direct action without the literal imagery of guns shooting things down. So I think that is also like an interesting tension. So it's sort of like, how do you do that? And the mundane gestures that are really still powerful, like the ability to rip pages and toss your bad poetry in a rage, to me is just as good feeling as, you know, some fantasy about me wielding a weapon. So I think that's something that, you know, it's about kind of contact sports with your own drawings with each other, but through this other medium, and kind of watching also like a bunch of code kind of dump your RAM if you add too many demons and like something just goes horribly wrong. So, you know, even Doom can crash your computer. So I think that's like something that is also like testing the limits of like just how many things can you put in and like watch it crash kind of thing. And so the ability of punching your own drawings, like Eben spent a lot of time drawing things by hand, and that's kind of what goes into this game. So like, how do you feel about that? You know, how does that make you feel?
It's pretty cathartic, yeah. You know, I don't know. Have you guys ever wanted to punch your own drawings?
I would like think that's
I get it.
pretty
Yeah.
satisfying. So I think again, like, you know, this idea of point of view and like really kind of you're transported through the screen to these other worlds, but you're really not, like, you're still here clicking away and getting carpal tunnel or whatever, or spritzing away at your screens, freaking out about germs or some other thing, right? And so the idea that that these mundane actions can still be powerful, and also that we can be multiple people through this game, sort of like we switch off genders and hands, so both our hands are in the game, so that we can be as a, you know, actor, like point of view, we can kind of switch roles. And so that's also something that we had fun with. And having this kind of like disembodied action is part of this kind of green screen idea. So really this methodology of like having action at a distance and how that can still be made to feel direct anyway. And I think David and I talked about this the other day in our conversation about how AR, VR, and some of these touch hand sensors have gotten so good that even without vibration or something specifically touching you, like just the sound and the visual of manipulating something in a virtual space can start to feel like real bodily sort of sensation. So I think that is on a very basic level, like what we're doing, just kind of taking images and thinking about that. But yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of things being done that are really advanced with that whole concept. And so I think, again, we talked about Doom as hacker culture. These are the makers of Doom. And I wanted to talk about this as a project of fan fiction. And I guess, Eben, if you could talk about that because of your background or practice, that just in terms of like what that means to us, or, you know, the importance of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in designing this game and working on this project, and specifically in like designing the look of it more specifically, right? And the more iconic symbols that have been used or recognizable actors, we thought it was still really important to kind of, you know, maintain some kind of relationship to, you know, just the original kind of aesthetic and sensibilities and concept of the original game, you know, and instead of completely redesigning and rebuilding this thing from the ground up, like how do we kind of make jokes with ourselves, make jokes with a larger community while still kind of maintaining a sense of, or just maintaining a relationship, I guess, to the original design and sort of feel of the game. Because that's the thing. It's like, this isn't really a satire, right? It's a critical piece of work, and it's something we think about in a critical way, but it's also a celebration of something too. And trying to reconcile those two modes of thinking can be a little murky sometimes when you get into the territory of like fandom, right? And that's like really interesting to me. You know, how do you kind of bring something forward with you without being exactly derivative or not critical at all? And I think that, I don't know, if we go through and see some of the other examples of how we were kind of drawing these things, you might see some of that. This is also kind of an interesting part too that we wanted to make, is that some of these like really iconic things that, you know, were very popular and people were really familiar with and became, yeah, iconic. Again, were kind of made out of modular pieces or things just laying around the house, right? I mean,
Toys.
like this toy of like a Jurassic Park had just come out when this game was in development, so they had this Jurassic Park action figure laying around that they just built this other character out of, literally on top of. They built a clay model on like the top half of this thing and photographed it in 360 degrees and then pixelated it. That's how they did a lot of the original sprites, actually. But just this idea then that this can be like this toy laying around becomes kind of immortalized in this way and hidden and then reconstituted. Right. So, you know, we developed a version of this character, and how many steps away is it from this Jurassic Park action figure? Yeah, this guy up here, which is also like not only based off of that character, but then also based off of this kind of obscure bygone hockey team, like New Haven hockey team. I don't know how long you lived in New Haven.
I have an image of it later, but you'll see it. It's called the New Haven Beast.
Well,
and so yeah, I think
the Beast of New Haven. It was
the Beast of New Haven.
They were supposed to be like the best, but it was like the Beast of New Haven, right? And they were terrible. And you would basically like, I don't know, you would go there if you wanted to like watch people fight. Like that was like the draw for it, I guess. It wasn't even a hockey game, really. So there's just this kind of violence there. But so it's like, you know, what did you say the other day when we were talking with you, David, about New Haven being this really important, unimportant place?
Yeah, I mean, there are certain similarities, I think, between New Haven and Milwaukee in that, like, some things aren't similar at all, but some things are. They're both, you know, Milwaukee's like an hour and a half or hour 45 from Chicago, you know, like the biggest city in the Midwest. And like New Haven's like an hour and 45 minutes from New York City. So they're both kind of cities with interesting things happening, but that have this like magnetic pull of this like metropolis right next door that kind of takes away some of the energy, maybe. But yeah, I guess, it was really interesting to me to think about, you know, because when we think about virtual space, oftentimes we are, especially with video games, it's like this kind of nowhere space, or like a space that isn't local. It's not local, right? And so it's interesting to have it anchored in this space that is kind of I don't know. I don't want to call it, I love New Haven. But like it's sort of mundane in some way. Like it's sort of, you know, it's very like micro, like to think about it as new, you know, like.
Yeah, there's a reason.
It's a microcosm, right?
Yeah. There's a reason.
It's also a microcosm that has one of everything. Like I always think about that. It has one of everything. It's sort of a small town that's representative of diversity and the disparity of America. It has Yale, and it has, you know, some sort of more outer suburbs. It also has, you know, different populations. It has kind of urban blight. Like it has like experiments by architects in the 60s that have completely remade it and taken it apart. It sort of has one everything in this weird way that like is kind of nowhere and everywhere. And that's sort of interesting to me. It's always been this like non-scaled and hard to pin down.
So what was important for both of you about it being like anchored in a geographical location that is very specific and exists for us? Like,
I think it's so important that we missed
it was COVID
going to we missed going to these spaces. We missed going downtown. We missed going to Sports Haven. We missed going to Long Wharf, which is like basically where the only place on night, you know, where you have 95 on the water. So it's like, you know, having this kind of waterfront that's not a waterfront. So there is just all these like things about New Haven, like being there, being in that public space that's sort of problematic and not half the time not beautiful, not even doesn't even come together, right? It's like apples and oranges. But I really miss just having that public space. So trying to just build our own version of that, right? Eben, you were going to say something?
No, I don't know. I lost my train of thought. I was just gonna say something about the Coliseum exploding and like how like 500 people will like tailgate at 6 a.m. to watch that happen. You know, like I don't know. Just I was going somewhere with that in regard to New Haven lore. Maybe it was like you're talking about these architects who build these buildings in the 60s, and then like people in the early 2000s like drink beer and blow them up. You know, there's a kind of creative. Is that creative destruction? I don't know. They haven't built anything else yet, just a parking lot.
There are many promises for that site. Trust me.
I think that in a small town too, I don't know, there is that kind of, I don't know. We just try to play to certain kinds of lore in that way too. I don't know. It's sort of,
it's like, it's almost like it's a place that doesn't have that many legends to it. So you're like creating a mythology. I mean, in some ways it has a mythology around like an Ivy League school, but it's like creating a mythology for a place that doesn't have a kind of mythology that everybody recognizes, you know? Like movies
it was
are shot
the model
in New York
city,
and
right?
Chicago, but they're not shot that much in like Milwaukee.
Yeah,
or
whatever
Haven,
the
you know.
Yeah, whatever the lore or the mythology is contentious at best.
Yeah.
You know.
It's been used as a testing ground for various architectural experiments. It's been called the model city. They had funding to remake it and all these urban experiments that didn't work. So, you know, it's constantly just treated as this kind of, I don't know, test site, and then that erases things, right? So there's also that, and I think that is interesting architecturally, and it's something I think about a lot and why I sort of love it so much, and it's problematic. But yeah, I mean, I think that came out of Bauhaus, also Exodus, that came to Yale and then decided they would just treat this place as a testing ground for the experiment. So I think all of that kind of plays through, right? These buildings and the infrastructure that we're stuck with, and it's sort of mega scale, and at the same time it's a small town that just doesn't really hold it so well, and it sort of holds a lot of things that don't come together. And so that's kind of something I love, and you'll see that sensibility in sort of the work that we make, because I think there are a lot of like, there's chaotic things coming together, and I'm interested in holding that space and making space for that kind of incongruity and the chaotic additive logic. And so I think the other thing is like the back end of that, like the tension between the organizational systems to keep all these assets together as a world and the complete absurdity of what these things are. So if you look at the original game, you know, you look at these lists of things, and they're very specific categories of things that act in different ways, but you'll see that, you know, the list is like bloody mess, hanging like it's like very, very you know, gruesome and juvenile and, you know, monstrous things organized, you know, by coders into this like really efficient, great, you know, working game. And so I think about that. I think about, you know, then translating that and thinking about these things and having to think about what position and purpose all these elements play in the original game, and then translating that to like what we need and think for our New Haven version, right? And so this kind of transposing of systems and stories, because I think, you know, I read this list on the left, that's the original game list, and, you know, that is what makes up the entire world of that game. And those things are recognizable, and they are like the place, right? So it's just really interesting to think about, you know, why is dead cacodemon, you know, something that's used to decorate, and, you know, dead kind of monsters stick around to tell you where you've been, right? So they become like wayfinding. So wayfinding as a cadaver, like that's something really totally gruesome. But this game had the genius of doing that in a way that like you knew where you had been. So, you know, there's this logic, right, that gets uncovered from the silliness of like these, you know, gaming and Dungeons and Dragons love things, because these guys were really into these kind of myth making in Dungeons and Dragons and other games. So I think, you know, that comes out of that, but it's also something that's very well organized and has very different elements that come together to play a part. And so how they're correlated and how they support each other is something that's interesting. And so I think that is just something I think about, and like how you take it apart and hack that to take it up. then it becomes something meaningful for, you know, your own kind of personal history or how you put it back together. And that's kind of a collective endeavor if you really want it to be legible, you know, for New Haven or for other people. So I think about that and how it carries through. So yeah, that's kind of just showing the back end. And again, like the pre-built actions are very monster specific. And then we collaborated using a digital platform. So really the ability to paste things into a bulletin board where we could flatten everything out that we thought about and kind of brought together about New Haven and the game and the references and learning as we went. So I don't know if you have anything to say about the last slides, Eben, before I move on to this little tour.
Yeah, I mean, just with the Miro board, just kind of this is sort of being this unfettered testing ground where we can kind of play with scale and play with collage and play with the interaction of images before the commitment of like batch integration into the actual asset, right? So this is still like, this reminds me very much of cutting up all of our paintings and rearranging them into body pillows on the floor of our studio about 7 months ago. It's the same impulse, right? And again, this thing, like I had said before, this idea of like kind of creating things that are meant to be modular as well as serving a specific purpose, they're not necessarily arrested by that all the time exclusively. This is a way to kind of rearrange and rethink and revisualize how we kind of play with and use these elements.
And references as well, and sort of text. And, you know, I've also, my coping mechanism is really writing. So a lot of bad poetry and writing that kind of goes into this. So also like bringing the writing into the game in various ways and thinking through these lists and these names of things. And this is New Haven. So this shows you the kind of like scale of infrastructure on the waterfront. And, you know, the Pirelli building on the left, which is a Marcel Breuer building, which has now been turned into an IKEA billboard. That's a huge kind of, you know, for me, that's a monument of New Haven because you only see it passing by on the highway. You do not stop. You know, you don't even know like whatever New Haven, what is that? You just like see the big billboard that's a building, and you know, it's now being transformed into a sustainable hotel, which is really interesting. So, I mean, I think there's just a lot of things about New Haven that are interesting to me specifically as an architect. Sports Haven is another part of Long Wharf that basically it's this like huge off-track betting space that these things used to be popular like along the lines of Jai Alai and other like large gathering spaces for gambling, watching horse races. And, you know, it's built to resemble one of these oil drums. So it was really not an oil drum reused. It was built from scratch to look like of a piece with this oil port. So I think that is also really an interesting obsolete idea. And it's something that's still in New Haven. And the space itself is kind of just, I don't know, huge, empty. Half of it's been shut down, but it's still around. Sort of days are numbered. So I think, David, you mentioned how, you know, this kind of city is peripheral and it has the pull of a large metropolis. But that also means there's some things that are kind of left over that are kind of like just left alone because no one knows what to do with them. You know, they want to sell the parking lot, but no one wants to buy. So this space continues to exist. And I love that stuff and the kind of like leftover obsolete things that people still use or use in different ways, right? So that's kind of why we're obsessed with this space. And we started going there also just to drink and to talk and to study because it's completely no light. It feels like a library. So it almost like feels like almost like serene inside. And it's, you know, just you just hear the like lull of horse race and horse names kind of being drawn off. And they have a pretty good, you know, food if you go in. I mean, it's just a weird space. So Sports Haven is the reason I'm showing it is because we're really like the level that we use as a demo we really built Sports Haven as our game. And also because technology, like gambling technology was also really early ways to use computing. And there was just like gambling terminals where like also you can look at the trajectory of that as a really interesting technology kind of trajectory and also like of actual what these terminals look like. And also our the idea for me like it equated with, you know, technology and gaming as this kind of power and promise of progress and this kind of wheel of fortune versus like this nostalgia and the obsolete, because like technology is really built on like things going obsolete because you always want to sell the newest thing. So there's like this like having both held together, and for me, like looking at these gambling terminals sort of does both. And so it's just like an association, and it's also like a specific association was kind of off track betting, large space of Sports Haven. And so this is, the cylinder that looks like the oil drum, and inside on the left is at its height, when it was actually fully being used, was restaurants on these terraces, gambling terminals all at the bottom, and these like strange corridors. And it's like a really strange architecture. Like it's very, very strange. The architect is Herb Newman, but he won't own it. He won't even say he built it. It's not even on his website. So it's sort of also like he disowns it. I think that's part of like the lore of New Haven. I think, and again, we started like building these things into the game that were sort of like these terminals, and this kind of like idea of this terminology of like restart and reset, and this kind of also like Wheel of Fortune, like this kind of like death and rebirth like idea. And I think that just that's sort of a screenshot of like what it looks like inside. You can see that sort of like drawings. It's really made of like a lot of drawings that Eben made. This is the plan of it, sort of the map of it. And I don't know, Eben, if you want to talk a little bit about like how you built this from memory, and we couldn't get the floor plans, or couldn't get in because it was COVID and it was closed, and we thought about just making it like that, but then you just made it from memory.
This is a flat blue like floor plan that you drew out of.
Yeah. So, and this is a pretty early version too. The map is
expanded
a lot larger from here. There's an entire like labyrinth like that is just
back
sort of
room.
It's just kept growing. But yeah, I mean, I trying to think about it less as a scale model, right, and more of an impression, and how do you, I'm interested in the memory of these spaces that we can't occupy right now. And I'm just interested in that generally, COVID or not, but like, the place really does have this like really overwhelming presence, even though its like function is kind of understated. It's strange. It's like, it really does feel like like you're going to see like the ruin of something, but it's like this interior ruin. And it's, the symmetry of it is kind of intimidating, and like Aude said, you go in there to read, like you could walk into this space, which is technically a sports bar and an off gaming betting site, and kind of curl up with a book, and nobody would see you or talk to you for like 2 or 3 hours. It was that kind of big and vacuous. And in that way, it also kind of seemed like this, it was almost public in that way. It felt like a public space, which I think is another reason why I was kind of interested in working with this as a model for this game, because public space has been, access to public space has been curtailed in a lot of ways. As far as the back end of this, which you'll probably see when Aude does a couple of playthroughs, I mean, that's just me kind of meditating on doom labyrinths and casinos you can't find your way out of, and just overwhelming splendor of flashing lights and screens, and just like that total disorientation. But yeah, I guess that's
No, that's so true. And I think that casinos in general are disorienting in a multimedia way. And I often feel disoriented in the same way on Zoom and in these meetings, constant input. And there's a purpose to that, right? And it's like you walk around Mohegan Sun and you hear that like dinging and the music kind of crescendoing up and down and never coming to any kind of climax. Like it's constant, right? And this like constant input and like user experience designers, think about this stuff. Like there's lots of research being done on what types of buttons and where they are and what people click on. And I think that constant input is like also this gambling mentality and the addiction of that as well. And I think that is like a really big part of, I don't know, digital space as well. And it's like not to say that it's good or it's bad, but to me that is an aspect of it, and it's like, go ahead.
Well, I've just been thinking, and I thought about this before you came to talk, but really after looking at the game when I did a virtual studio visit. But one of the first texts that we read as a class was the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. And just because you have this architectural background, I can't stop thinking about this statement in that piece about how, like, he compares the way in which we kind of experience the illuminated screen and film and the way that it like subliminally shapes our behaviors. He kind of ends it by talking about how architecture is like the oldest form of that, because it sort of shapes the way that we move through space without us thinking about it at all. And so you start thinking about like architecture, like social media is architecture, and 3D space literally is architecture, and how that we're unaware oftentimes of the way that it shapes our behavior. Yep.
And it's also used in expert terminology, as you know, user experience designers are often architects. It is used, the term architecture is used for websites and the kind of structure of what buttons make people click on things. So I think it's also really interesting how that's translated in the terminology of the industry, and that's something I also think about. And yeah, I mean, it's really like those are shared interests as well. I mean, I think that's something that is prevalent, and like we all need to be aware and fluent in that language somehow if we want to take up that public space and make it our own. So that's kind of like why this is kind of key.
But yeah, I never thought about Instagram and Facebook and all the other social media apps as this sort of form of slot machine. You know, it's like you post something and then you get all the red likes that show up, and it becomes this kind of like
ding, ding, ding.
You just keep needing more and more and more and more, you know.
Did you notice they flipped the button for like the likes you get with the shopping button on Instagram in the last update? I mean, there are some obvious tweaks, right? But there is very insidious tweaks too. And I think, you know, Eben, you did a book about dark patterns that talked about that and made like fun of that, and it was also like poetry about this with Charlie Taylor. I think it's something I think about, you know, especially recently. I think we're stuck in this world and we kind of have to wrangle with that, and who controls that, and can we control that, you know, in a weird way. So that's kind of like interesting to me, and sort of peripheral to the game, but it's just something I think about. And so yeah, this is more just like drawings, pictures of the actual drawing. So, you know, to go back to David introduced this class to us as really like hand making and digital making. So really, I think I'll let Eben talk through this and you could tell me next, but I think, you know, a lot of the work that went into this game, you drew by hand.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even in the sort of more traditionally understood kind of paintings that I would make in the studio, there was always a very heavy digital component in the construction of that work, whether by considering digital studies via collage or saving objects to photograph that are then processed and then painted, or digitally manipulating previous work that then gets reconstituted back into new physical paintings. There's always been this kind of like give and take with digital imagery and traditionally made imagery, and kind of filtering them back and forth, like almost around each other, you know? And one of the things, and I guess I should say that work kind of has a quality of feeling like a collage from time to time, because it's all painted, but it is a collage. And I think that one of the things that was visually attractive to me about Doom as well was that there are these disparities in the way that the images are rendered and the way the images are presented to you, with these kind of tactile differences between the actor's own hands and the way the demons look in the game versus the way that the space you occupy is kind of rendered. They're all kind of existing in these different worlds, right? And so I would try to make paintings that would do something similar, right? Like have all of these incongruous sort of elements kind of talking to each other in a single composition. And so that's, I guess, one point I want to make. The second one is I also was, you know, discouraged by the prospect of making physical work that people had to gather into a room to look at for the next 8 months? And how do I continue to develop a drawing practice and create images by hand, which is something that I'd love to do very much. But what's now what's the new delivery system for that? Because traditional ways of showing work just weren't very exciting to me in the sort of post-COVID landscape. And so this seemed like an interesting way to do it, right? This seemed like an interesting way to develop a project that necessitated handmade objects that could only really be shown in a digital context. And so that was sort of just the way of thinking from the beginning here. Not to mention I make a lot of comic books as well. I spend a lot of time drawing comics. And so the idea of just filling up a table with stacks of drawings on paper is kind of comforting to me. And that's something that I wouldn't really want to compromise, even though I will say in the last few months I've been spending a lot of time in the back end and looking at the script editor and looking at code. But yeah, also the other thing is too that like these things, these drawings, these pictures are used for this project and they're implemented into this project and they're made for it in a way, but that's not really it. This whole project started off as thinking through a print project, actually. This was going to be a book before it was a game. And these objects kind of continue to have that potential for me when I do want to make more installation-based work again, or paintings, just paintings on a canvas, or sculptural works. Like these will be models for them, or potentially, you know, even become part of them. There needs to, for me, there kind of needs to just be this almost like soup stock of material that I can pull from when I'm in the studio, right? Like kind of having this idea of throwing things into the corner, into the flat file, into a physical pile, and then retrieving them later, hopefully to make something else. And I can do that with digital work, but the physicality of drawing is just kind of, it's important to me. And it needed to be maintained.
Eben, it struck me, I was really interested in, you know, how you both showed the slides of the repurposed paintings into soft sculpture. And it was very interesting to me to hear you talk about the image boards and use that as the like sculpture, actually like stitching together physical objects as kind of a metaphor for what those picture boards were. Mm-hmm. And it just, it to me, that was like kind of the essence of some of the things that we've been exploring, which is the ways in which sometimes when we're thinking about digital things, we have to connect that digital making to a physical process and to an understanding of materials, even though it's totally, it's just pixels and ones and zeros, but we sort of have to have that understanding about it. And then it's interesting to hear you talk about how we're so immersed in the digital world that even the things that we're making by hand are also, we're thinking about digitally on some level.
Oh yeah.
Like, you know, and even as you're making the drawings, you're thinking about like, what are they going to look like in this video game? Like, you know,
this slide here is a perfect example.
Which slide? This one?
One more right there, right? So the bottom or the image in the bottom right does not work within the physics of how these things behave in this world. This image does not work. And this was one of the first experiments that I had tried, and it's still in there, but you'll notice that, you know, there's clipping issues, right? So you can see that's like this form that's kind of like this pile after it's been dispatched, and then there's this kind of black liquid that's sort of kind of, you know, coming out of the bottom. And if you can imagine that this is a flat cardboard cutout that's supposed to sit on a flat line, it doesn't really work because you can see the bottom of the form. Oh, I'm actually not sharing my screen. I keep kind of gesturing towards it with my mouse. I'm usually doing this myself all day. Yeah, so like if you look at the bottom line of the actual form, that's where it's supposed to kind of sit in the reality of that world. But there's this like perspective with this liquid that's coming out that doesn't match up. It doesn't square with what the game can do. So it just actually disappears, right? That's a very mundane example, but it has kind of influenced the way I think about these drawings going forward, you know, and kind of what is possible and how are the drawings limited, right? And how can they be limited? Yeah, like drawing in an extra leg for a character that is then later removed because it's actually just a mirrored sprite, you know, with one difference. And it's like, well, I have to draw 89 of these. So let me just like make it a little bit easier and shave a couple off the top, right? Which is true to form because, you know, in the spirit of recycling, Adrian Carmack, who was one of the founding members of id Software and their chief artist when they were working on Doom in the early 90s, was doing that stuff all the time. He was constantly pushing pixels around, reincorporating old sprites, drawing over previous drawings. Like there was so much recycling and reconstitution happening in the early production of that thing. So it's kind of in spirit similar. Both like
there's an efficiency to that, right? That's
as well as my own kind of interest in the studio. They kind of square up in an interesting way.
You did talk about modular parts, and it is also an architectural concept, like having, you know, things that match and are modules and can be made as multiples and then put back together, right? It's like thinking through like these very specific characters with these parts that can be taken off and put back on in different ways, and you know, to really like can have a built-in efficiency. So I think that this, again, this logic of the kind of absurdity and efficiency sort of together, to me, is very representative of the digital, and it's like different than just what it looks like. It's kind of how it operates, and also multiple versions and things changing and moving and sort of pre-scripted different modes of things, but like potentialities, but they're really like numbered. So I think, you know, you can see like this demon didn't have so many states, but some of them have like 80 different drawings. All of them, you know, Eben drew by hand. So I think just a ton of work to draw, but also like you didn't really perfectly align them as if you were drawing a cell of an animation. It's sort of like the beauty of these things coming back together, even though like some of them you said, I don't think this is going to work. Like they're going to look all weird and shifty because like they're not really matching up, but it actually works really well, you know, and it actually does look fluid and believable in the game in this kind of weird way. So there's like forgiveness in the kind of, I don't know, speed of it or the whatever graphics. So I think that's also really something that's interesting.
Yeah.
Jerkiness. The jerkiness is part of it.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like,
it's like, yeah, that kind of like bedraggled character that like it's like looking like it's learning how to walk. That's like part of the medium, you know.
The walking simulator, that's like backwards. I think, and some games play on that, right? Like yeah, Getting Over It was Bennett Foddy, like uses this like man in a cauldron that like has it's just like there is like games that purposely play with that, like, but you know, I don't know, difficulty of motion, right? And so it's just something interesting. And I think this is more just like screenshots in the game. And I think also we made characters that spawn other characters, so that we're interested in also like worlds that make worlds. So these characters that kind of spawn things uncontrollably and like spit out hot dogs that give you resources and health and spit out clouds, and it's like you make an empty space and then you put this thing in there and it just like makes a whole world of stuff, and you kind of like watch it expand out of your control. And I think that like this kind of expanding replication is also something I think about as part of digital space that I'm always interested in in exploring, and also like the ability to just like scale and recolor things very quickly and easily. So we have like multiple versions of like a character that, you know, one is huge and spits out the other.
Can you go back one slide, dude? I just want to show everybody. See, if you look closely, you can see what I'm talking about with the clipping. With these characters, how they're just kind of like sunken in. There's still like another inch of that drawing that we'll never kind of be able to see, you know?
You have to choose, you know, does it completely hover and then you sort of see it's a, or you just kind of bury it. And the armature of this space in Doom is very differently built than the actual characters, right? So that's also like, you know, for us, like playing was that like these very incongruous modes. And also again, I think working in sort of like text as texture, and you know, having these different characters that really this also like shoots birds. So, you know, you have this vacuous space that's empty where you start having birds flying around, you know, like coming at you with bird sounds. So the sound is also like a huge part of it. And having kind of atmosphere. So as you like, you know, work through the game, like certain things happen that make it, you know, it's just, again, it's like it envelops your drawing in this like mystery that they didn't have and that you can't foresee. So the surprise of having the kind of engine and the computer make something different with what you intended is really beautiful and just surprising. And so I don't know, this character had, what was it, like 83 frames? Was it 80?
Yeah,
something like 80 drawings. The Revenant, and so he cries at you and his tears are very ineffective. They don't really hit you. And so and also, you know, things turn into other things. That's sort of like a joke. We like to think about humor and, you know, what, you know, you had these like piles that you leave behind, like cadavers that are wayfinding. So what if you left behind something that was useful? Like, you know, maybe this isn't so useful because it's a pile of like spent beers, but some of them are actually leaving you things that you might use. And so again, I think, you know, the New Haven, the Beast of New Haven. So we talked about, you know, this character is really a hybrid of love of a Doom monster and also like a hockey team. And the other, you know, New Haven character is really this idea that like New Haven's very like high low. You know, there's like this kind of American every town, and there's Yale. So this like Yale Bulldog being also like the Red Dog logo and transforming back and forth between the two, and then, you know, turning into a candle that like lights your way. So this is just like a, again, like a joke on like the shape shifting and absurdity of this kind of world. And, you know, again, like enjoying the sort of built-in sort of glitches and transitions and right, like the kind of melted pixel like aspect of this game. And, you know, again, I think working with like a built armature, but building in this kind of like idea, like this, you know, thing, we're in a college town, and, you know, this is now about being a college student in New Haven, or, you know, the skill levels have to do with kind of college experience. And it's just, it's a funny kind of, and for me, also working in writing in the game as both textures and text that appears on your screen. So you're like forced to read my bad poetry as you play the game. And it's like, it's actually just funny because I think the poetry is about the game and this kind of these digital worlds. Like we've been talking this whole time about all these ideas that like I sort of also write a lot about that, and I write it in this poetry. This kind of register of poetry is written on my phone and sort of like on the go and like while I run and stop. So there's this like practice that I have to cope with things that has to do with writing poetry, and what do I do with that, and like how do I perform that, and like performing it in this way that's both a voiceover in the game and text that appears in the game. And I think David, I also noticed like there, you know, the kind of speech and noises of your characters in your game also, you know, really speak to me in that way, and that like you're trying to get away from this thing and it's like talking some politics at you and you can't get away from it. And the other characters kind of like have this frog like repeated rhythm. And so there's, you know, there's this aspect of it. It's also like, how do you bring in writing and another level of thought into this game that someone might just ignore, but you kind of like are walking through that as a space and just turning things upside down and really having the ability to use light and fog and characters that blend into that environment in different ways. So I think that is just something that we think about. Also, just posting this mod, because it's a Doom mod, like other people in the community being able to like take it apart as well, take our parts, reuse them, take just the demons, put them in their levels, like really just reusing this stuff that we've made as part of their things, just as we have also taken some of the things that other people have made and either studied them or taken them and reused them and credited them, but we've also involved other friends into this game as like a kind of curatorial experiment. So it's become this like space for other people to show GIFs and also animations. So that is the total of the PowerPoint, and that was pretty long. So I mean, at this point, I can just play the game.
Yeah, show us the game, and maybe as you're playing, if students have just questions or comments, feel free to just turn your
What
mic
I'm gonna
on.
do is I'm gonna like turn the sound to the game sound. So I'll be hearing you, but you can't hear me. So Eben, you're gonna have to field questions while I play the game.
Sure.
If you don't mind.
No, that's all good.
I'm just gonna do that, and I'm gonna do it in my camera view instead of presenting, if you don't mind. So I think that if you can just like, or if I could present it too, that's easy. Then it's just maybe easier to do that. Can you guys still hear me? Can you see the game or the this is
screen? You can see the map.
You can see the map, right?
I don't think you're screen sharing it yet.
I have it in my camera view. Are you able to make my camera view big enough?
I see.
Or do you want me to put it on the screen? I could put it on the screen too. It
might
bigger.
be. Well, I guess if I just need to change my layout, because if I do spotlight, then you're big. So
here, let me just do it in my share screen. That way it'll be easier. Hold on.
Okay.
Oh, that's cool. Lee was just saying that you can pin the camera.
Or it may be bigger if I just do it in the screen share. That way.
I see it. This is perfect.
You can see it? You can do it this way? Okay, good.
You're still,
never know.
Still kind of small on my end, but
okay.
Everybody has
Eben,
to do that. Okay, got it. Yeah, I think I got it. You just hit the pin icon when you hover over the screen.
Can you see the game?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm gonna go into the different sound modes so that you can hear the game, and just tell me if you can't hear it, because sometimes this doesn't work.
Okay. What I'm curious about is how would I unpin this?
Settings.
Oh, wait, hold on. How do I unpin this? Because now I don't know if I can.
Let's see.
Okay. All right, there we go. I got it. All right, cool. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, please feel free.
There's also a chat function, but I think it's easier if you want to just speak into the microphone. I think it's easier for them to kind of hear you and respond.
Yeah,
but I've seen a couple.
Lee, yeah, Doom Guy is wearing a face mask actually, but that was a detail lifted from another previous mod that we had opened up and taken apart many months back. It was sort of like it was this Doom mod that was published as kind of an April Fool's joke back in April 1st, where was in bad taste, kind of. But like, you know, the whole goal was to like run around and get toilet paper, and all of the demons were just big floating molecules of the coronavirus. But that's one of those little icons that kind of just remained in the asset over the next, you know, 7 or 8 months, or as long as we've been working on this.
You are ready to start. This game is now old as the hills. It is a trap, you will say again.
Inside an undriven simulation, pure in direction, destruction, all of it, you make a way through.
I didn't mean to ask you for a minute, but are you too like familiar with the game LSD Dream Emulator at all?
I have heard about that. I'm thinking of the same one. That was an earlier. Was that an earlier game?
Yeah. So it's 1998, I think, and the concept behind it is that instead of using like the PlayStation as a platform to play video games, it was for art.
Okay, yeah, hold on one second. Hey, Aude, would you mind turning the game volume down just a little bit? Just having a hard time hearing questions.
Oh, I can put on headphones.
Could you? Yeah, but could you repeat that though? What was it?
Oh yeah, so LSD Dream Emulator game, PlayStation game in the 90s, and it was developed as a reaction to how the creator wanted to make the virtual space a platform for art rather than video games.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of the
sorry, no, it's not really interesting. I don't think I had it. So what? Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, Aude, can you turn it down a little bit more? Still having a hard time hearing.
Sorry.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, so I had to put on my headphones.
I probably shouldn't have been like, let's do a question answer during.
It's really cool though, like getting to see it all happen. Because I was thinking like this is a living, breathing ecosystem in a virtual space. But LSD Dream Emulator in that it's like an exploratory game where the only thing you can really do is interact and touch the world around you, and you're put into like these randomly generated areas as a result.
Okay. I gotta play that.
Yeah. I can type it in there.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I was thinking about that too. Just like, I mean, that's one of the things that's really interesting now is that there's so many smaller studios that are making games that function in a way where they are a little bit more experiential in that way, right? Like, in the way that I'm actually gonna wait until
You can wait. That was ill-conceived.
Sorry.
Turn your name to heaven clouds, shrouded to overpower my code, yet the joke isn't ever getting old. Regenerate, in no safe space at all. How does this ever go one way? How does it not refract? Hooray! Offset minds of shimmering. Revenant clones still floating. All beauty in its devil details. Seeps into a dark chill reverse. Made of flimsy sunny sticks. And all the pipe, the fire you took out. I want it all back and now, mounting 3 decks, to return to it again. Not yet concrete enough to believe in resurrection. The right words, the right acts. Holding down imminent resurgence. Spawn blunt at present, as present. The map was ready. Up the exit sign. Reanimator demons, reverse the death sequence. Mutants, in dungeon crawl, to no second coming of originals.
Cool.
All right. Yeah, so I think that was the only couple of areas that Aude was planning on playing through. I don't know if she's just planning on flying through the back end here for a little bit. Or Aude, if you want, I could bring up Slade and we could look at that too. Or if you guys just have any more questions. Also, David, how long is your class? I realized I never asked you that.
We probably should wrap it up soon because I just want to check in about projects and stuff. But I do
hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. We can hear you.
If
sorry
if
about that.
students have questions, I want to give you just the opportunity to ask them questions about anything that they shared with you, or just provide feedback to them, or just anything that struck you or caught your fancy, caught your interest during the talk.
I have been thinking about this the entire time you guys have been talking about your project. For me, like, seeing your work is extremely like nostalgic to me and like very meaningful to me, mainly because I grew up on video games, and I've been trying to really understand the meaning of like virtual spaces and reality, and how they can be a substitution for reality, especially as you're recreating New Haven and Doom. It's really nostalgic for me because growing up, I did not have the ability to socialize with people that well, just because I was super socially anxious and I didn't know how to navigate social situations. So right now in my work, I'm trying to explore that feeling of like escaping into a virtual world that I feel safe in. And seeing your work is very inspiring to me. I think it's super cool.
Oh, well, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
that's kind of what we need it for as well. I mean, I think we've like needed this retreat and way to communicate with each other, as well as with our like shared pasts. And yeah, I mean, I think it's been a really tough time, a reset. So I think having the ability to like revisit, or I don't know, I make jokes in the poetry, like regenerate in no safe space at all, but it's like it is a safe space to me, and it was in '93. And I think that like, you know, there's this idea of public space as also this space that's not necessarily safe, but you know, this retreat into a different kind of space, or that's also public in a different way, you know, in your own way, and with your own memories, and how you make public space your own, you know, in that way.
Yeah.
It can be digital too.
Yeah.
I thought one thing you said, Lee, I think it was maybe last class or the class before, you had mentioned just the experience of playing a video game and how it becomes this like memory for you, or like it's a like I think one of the interesting things that it brought up was this idea of like, are virtual spaces real spaces, right? If they're spaces that we can go to and then actually like remember as a life experience, does it make it the same as non-mediated analog experience, you know?
It's a really good question.
When you guys were talking about how this was a thing for you in the 90s, I was thinking about how your Doom is kind of like, for me, my generation, or at least my group of friends that I have, is like source games like Gary's Mod or Team Fortress 2. Me and my friends would like spend hours upon hours, just like so much time sucked into that game, where we could interact if we didn't want to go over to each other's houses, and modding that game, making so many modifications, and then creating memories in it. It's really cool, I think, just with technology, how since it's becoming so much more like a daily part of our lives, how there's different things that each generation latches onto. So it was cool for me to compare my experience of like shooting down like other enemies in Team Fortress 2 to your experiences with Doom and the fondness that you share with it.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think for me, it's been an interesting process in the sense that I'm a very different person maybe than I was when I was, 12 years old playing Doom, right? And so like 12 to 15 or whenever. And so like I feel thankful for an opportunity to go back and to kind of reevaluate what it was about that I find valuable, and frankly still find valuable, and what I can kind of manipulate, play with, mod into a vision that I feel comfortable sharing with people who have no kind of relationship to it either, which I think is really kind of interesting and really important. And especially now more than ever, like being able to kind of create something that we could share with all of you and have it work this way. It was kind of made in a lot of ways for this kind of forum or experience, and so, yeah, I guess I appreciate you saying that, and yeah, I don't know actually where I was going with that. Just
it's meaningful. Yeah. It's really meaningful space, right? And it's like, what is a space? Even if it's not real in the regular sense of things or not architecture, the meaning and the stories and the memories that you attach to it are just as meaningful, and they make that, the kind of monumental scale or the like stories that are accrued onto it, or even just a little, breadcrumbs that you leave for your friends in a mod that they might or might not find, right? It's like a way to actually communicate and message each other in this other way. I think is so meaningful. And I think that, it just moves so fast, and there's so many inputs and so many kind of forces at work making digital software and all these different things. So it's hard to like take kind of the space to think about the meaning that we accrue and the shared experiences. So I think it was a meaningful thing for me growing up and spending a lot of time playing video games in order to commune with, boys or whatever, just run away from talking to people. But I think it's like that space in my head is still there, and it's associated with this other digital, visual and spatial experience. And it's not the spatial experience of, architecture that I designed for work. It's this other thing that I can't even figure out and pin down. So I think that's kind of what we've been trying to do, is like pin that down, or not fully pin it down, but just kind of use the languages to try to get there and think about those things. And I think that sounds like what you guys are trying to do as well in your class. And it's really rich and great to hear you guys talk about it.
One question I had while you were playing the game was this, like the nature of a video game, and this is something where I haven't quite achieved this, but your game, it moves really fast, right? Like things are happening fast, and they happen faster than you can really almost process them. Like you can't really like process them that quickly in a good way, in a video game way. And the thing that like I'm wondering about and think about is like the role of art and the role of video games. Like, should there be a place where you like interrupt the user and make them think about where they are and what they're doing? Or should they be sort of hypnotized into like following the bright colors and flashing dots and and the like lush illustration?
I think it's a really interesting question. And I think that, we always, because it's Doom and it had to be fun and fast, and there was supposed to be no narrative, right? And to honor this game the proper way, it has to be fun and fast. But we also purposely have these interruptions of like bad poetry where you're supposed to read these kind of profound philosophical, I don't know, like dark oracle like sayings, right? And so there's this kind of incongruity and like ability to engage different sensibilities, but also like it doesn't really work necessarily together. But that's kind of fun too. Like the idea that you force that, right? And it's like forcing that as a way to ask that question. And I think that some experiences or do this really well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and can I just to add on to that, I mean, I like in this project particularly having these interruptions because it's, you know, like fast, right?
Mhm.
Because, you know, and I was talking about this a little bit earlier with this concept of kind of fandom a little bit, fandom and like self-actualization, self-realization within something that you just gleefully appreciate. I think that, you know, as much as we're sitting here giving a talk about a game like Doom and proclaiming love and interest for it, I also think it's like, you know, wildly problematic in a lot of ways. And so having these kind of sort of way stations where you're asked to kind of contemplate what it is exactly you're doing in the space without compromising the experience too much is something that's really interesting to me. You know, like it's all about like running through as fast as possible. Now you're reading poetry. Like that's
I love that. And actually, those were some really interesting moments to also just to see the poetry in that video game pixel font and in that video game lighting, like sort of taking it out of the like the way that we picture poetry, like handwritten with like a quill pen or, you know, printed on a book. Like I really like that contrast or within it or conflict between the content and the delivery system.
I really thought the voice that was used for the poetry was also really interesting too, because it's totally like detached from how like humans normally enunciate like their thoughts. So I feel like it makes you think a lot more of like what the experience is like in a digital landscape.
Well,
yeah, I mean, I think I write most of my poetry sort of like on my phone on the go, and it's also disjuncted. And also, I'm very fearful of public speaking, even though I've been talking to you guys for like an hour. I think that the idea of performing that poetry is like horrifying to me. So having this disembodied computer read this to me, even though it's my voice, is like, and it's a male voice too, and it's like this disembodied, powerful thing out of nowhere, is so great and gleeful. Like it's just like this exercise in like taking things apart again. So, you know, that's just like something to do with again the powers you can accrue in this other world, and I love that. It's just different.
this has been so awesome. Like I really, really appreciate you both taking the time to talk to the class about your ideas. And I mean, it's amazing how much work that you've put into this and just how much is going on in this world. It just seems like a Herculean effort. So it's really impressive.
More like the
Thank you very
obsession of
much.
gaming terminals.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, thank you very much, David. This was a lot of fun. And it was
Thank you
really
so
great
much
to
for
talk
having
to
us.
you guys. And if you guys have any other questions, David, feel free to give any of your contact information, and feel free to reach out to us if you guys want to keep talking or you have any questions about this project or anything. So.
And we will be posting the demo online so that you can download it and play it. You know, if none of you have played Doom before, or if you want to just check it out,
That'd be awesome.
It's not quite ready, but we're very, very close.
Yeah, let me know or let us know when that happens. And yeah, it would be really cool to share that with students.
Sweet.
Definitely will.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. All right, cool. I think I'm gonna just talk to students about their projects now. So, yeah, this has been great.
And thank you so much. And I'll be sending you some notes, some bad poetry about your work, David.
Cool.
So
appreciate it. Yeah.
I'll talk to you soon.
All right. See you later.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye. Thanks for coming.